Before we dive into this, I think it's only fair to warn you, this story isn't exactly lighthearted. It's packed with heavy, mature themes, the struggles of being a new mom, the messy dynamics of family, and the gut-wrenching reality of betrayal. If any of that hits too close to home or makes you uneasy, you might want to step back now. Honestly, I never thought I'd end up here. Growing up, I never pictured myself in this situation, standing in a cramped, dimly lit studio apartment, staring at a sink crusted with dried toothpaste, the faint buzz of traffic outside the only thing breaking the silence. The world keeps moving, but I'm stuck here, wondering how everything fell apart. This wasn't the life I dreamed of. By now, I thought I'd have a husband, a house, some kind of stability. I imagined waking up every morning in a home I could call my own, next to someone who loved me, someone to share the weight of life with. But life doesn't care about your plans. Expectations? They can shatter in a heartbeat, leaving you with nothing but the cold, hard reality of where you are. And when that happens, all you can do is keep moving, even if you have no idea where you're going. My name's Bray Shepherd. I'm 44, and for over 2 decades, I've raised my son alone, no partner, no support, just me. And I'll be honest, there have been times when the weight of it all felt like it would crush me. I can still remember those endless nights, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the walls were closing in. I'd ask myself, sometimes out loud, how much more I could take. My son, Maximus Espinoza, is 22 now. Saying that out loud still feels strange, like I'm stuck in the past when he was just a tiny baby I could cradle in my arms, his little fingers wrapped around mine, his soft coos filling the quiet of the night. Now, he's taller than me, with his own dreams, his own life, one that doesn't revolve around me anymore. Sometimes, I feel like I've been left behind, stuck in this weird, silent space between who I was and who I am now. I tell myself it's normal, that this is what motherhood is supposed to be, a slow process of giving everything you have, only to watch them grow up and need you less. And I know, on some level, that's a good thing. It means I did my job well. But then why does it feel like I'm the one who's lost? We live in this tiny studio apartment, one small, open space that holds our entire lives. One side has a bed that's too small for both of us, and the other side has a kitchenette no bigger than a closet, with a tiny stove, a sink, and a cramped counter. The bathroom's the only room with a door, and even that doesn't offer much privacy. In a place this small, privacy doesn't exist. I hear everything, his late-night phone calls, the clinking of dishes when he sneaks a snack at midnight, even the sound of his breathing when he sleeps. And I know he hears me too. There's no escaping each other here. We're so close, so intertwined, that even the silence between us feels shared. It's a kind of closeness neither of us can avoid. At first, we made it work. Rent isn't cheap, and I work long hours just to keep us afloat. Some weeks, I'm so drained I can barely hold a conversation, let alone deal with anything outside of survival. Maximus is trying to find his way too. He works part-time, takes classes when he can, but I see the frustration on his face. He wants more independence, more freedom, a life that isn't tied to mine. And I want that for him too. But wanting something doesn't mean knowing how to make it happen. Every morning was the same fight. I'd wake up early, trying to squeeze in a quick shower before rushing to work. Maximus would bang on the door, annoyed because he needed to get ready too. We'd yell back and forth, stress building, patience wearing thin. Some days, I'd give up and let him go first, even if it made me late. Other days, he'd be the one stomping away, muttering about how unfair it all was. We were stuck in this endless cycle, 2 people trapped in a space too small for both of us, both needing time, both needing more than this life was giving us. Then, one morning, after yet another rushed argument, we did something different. We sat down and talked. We needed a solution, a way to stop these fights before they destroyed what little peace we had left. Maximus was the one who brought it up first. Why don't we just shower at the same time? At first, I laughed, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. He was serious. And when I really thought about it, it made sense. What was the alternative? Wasting precious minutes waiting for the bathroom when we were both on tight schedules? Arguing every morning, starting the day off irritated and rushed? It wasn't weird, I told myself. It wasn't inappropriate. It was just practical, a mother and her son sharing a space, nothing more. So, we did it. The first time was awkward, but we laughed it off, making jokes about how ridiculous it was. There wasn't much space, so we had to move carefully, taking turns under the water, keeping it quick. It was just a routine, a small adjustment to make life easier. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But after a while, something felt different. At first, I ignored it, brushed it off as overthinking, exhaustion, stress. Maybe it was the way we started talking more in the shower than we did anywhere else. It was easier somehow, no distractions, just us, steam filling the air, water drowning out the world beyond that curtain. Or maybe it was how comfortable we became, too comfortable. There were moments, small ones, barely noticeable, where I'd catch myself feeling something I couldn't name, a strange pull, an unspoken tension that settled between us. And I didn't know what to do with it. So, I did what I always do, I ignored it. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired, that I was just feeling lonely. That all of this, the closeness, the strange feeling in my chest, was just a side effect of being stretched too thin, too used to being alone. I shoved it all down, burying it under the mountain of other things I didn't have the energy to face. I never stopped to think about where it might lead, never let myself believe that something as small and simple as a morning routine, a shared space, could flip my entire world upside down. But it did. And once you cross a line like that, there's no going back. I wish I could point to one specific moment when everything changed, some clear, defining event where I could say, that's when it all fell apart. But it wasn't like that. It was slow, subtle, 1,000 tiny moments blending together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. By the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late. At first, the showers were just practical, a solution to a problem. A way to save time, stop the fights, and keep things moving. But over time, something shifted. Those moments became different. It was the only part of the day where we weren't distracted by phones or the outside world. Just the sound of running water and this unspoken understanding that it was our time. The conversations started changing too. In the beginning, we'd talk about the usual stuff, what we had planned for the day, errands, whether the landlord had finally fixed the leaky faucet. But then, things got deeper. One morning, Maximus let out this frustrated sigh and muttered, "I don't even know why I bother applying for jobs. Nobody wants me." I turned to look at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Of course they do." He laughed, but it wasn't his usual laugh. It was hollow. "Then why do I keep getting rejected?" I didn't have an answer. I wanted to tell him everything would work out, that he was smart, hardworking, and capable. But the truth was, I knew exactly how rejection felt. I knew what it was like to pour your heart into something, to want it so badly, only to be told you weren't good enough. Before I knew it, I was telling him things I hadn't told anyone in years, about the time I almost landed my dream job, only to have it slip away at the last second. About the nights I spent crying alone in my car, too ashamed to let him see me break down. About the weight of carrying everything on my own for so long that I didn't even know how to ask for help anymore. Maximus listened. He didn't try to fix it or give me some empty reassurance that everything happens for a reason. He just listened. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. Looking back, I think that was the moment I stopped seeing him as just my son. Not in a way that felt wrong or unnatural, at least not at first. But suddenly, he was the only person I could talk to, the only one who understood what it felt like to struggle, to feel like you're drowning under the weight of expectations you can't meet. I started relying on him in ways I never had before. If something went wrong at work, he was the one I vented to. If I had a bad day, he was the one I turned to for comfort. Maybe that would have been fine if I had anyone else. But I didn't. I'd let go of everything, friends, relationships, even casual conversations with coworkers, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. Then one day, my friend Tiana Buchanan called me out on it. "You've been dodging my calls, Bray." I shifted uncomfortably, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. I've just been busy. No, she said, her tone sharp. You've been avoiding people. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out because she was right. She sighed, softer this time. You need to get out of that apartment. You need to have a life outside of Maximus. I do, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I hated how hollow they sounded. Do you? She shot back. I didn't have an answer. Maximus started pulling away right around the time I realized how much I was clinging to him. At first, it was small things, nights where he stayed out later, days where he barely spoke to me, moments where he seemed distracted, distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. And then, one morning, he dropped a bombshell. I applied for a job out of state. I froze. He didn't look at me when he said it. I need something new, Mom. I can't stay here forever. I knew this was coming. I knew. But knowing something doesn't mean you're ready for it. I forced a smile, tried to sound supportive. That's great, sweetheart. Really, I'm proud of you. And I meant it. But I also felt something else, something I didn't want to admit. Panic. If Maximus left, what would I have left? Who would I be without him? The thought terrified me more than I could put into words. That fear started seeping into my actions. I began checking in more often, texting him, calling him, asking where he was going. At first, he didn't seem to mind. He answered like he always had. But then, one night, he didn't come home. Not until 2 a.m. And something in me snapped. The second he walked in, I was on him. Where were you? He blinked, caught off guard. Out. With who? Why does it matter? His tone set me off. Because I worry about you, Maximus. Because you used to tell me things, and now it's like you don't even care. I don't have to tell you everything, Mom. Since when? He ran a hand over his face, frustrated. Since I became an adult. Since I started trying to have a life outside of this apartment. The words hit harder than I expected. And what am I supposed to do? My voice cracked before I could stop it. Just sit here and wait for you to leave? That's not my problem, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Silence. I felt it in my bones, the finality of those words. He wasn't trying to hurt me, but he did. Because it wasn't just about this fight. It was about all the moments that led up to it, all the ways I'd let my world shrink down to just him. And now, he was leaving me behind. I had no idea how to handle it. I should have seen it coming. I tell myself that over and over again, like if I say it enough times, I'll start believing it. That I wasn't blindsided, that I wasn't caught off guard, that I knew this moment would come. But the truth is, I didn't see it. I didn't want to. I'd been so wrapped up in our world, in the comfort of our routine, that I ignored every warning sign. I told myself that our closeness was normal, that there was nothing wrong with the way we relied on each other. But deep down, I knew. And the moment Maximus said it out loud, everything inside me shattered. I'm moving out, Mom. He said it so casually, like he was telling me he was picking up groceries, like he wasn't ripping my heart out. I felt the air leave my lungs. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my expression neutral, to pretend that my world wasn't collapsing in slow motion. He didn't look at me, that was the first sign. He was avoiding my eyes, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his jaw clenched like he was bracing for a fight. I put down a deposit on an apartment. It's not far, just a few miles from here. I waited for him to say something else, to tell me he wasn't serious, that it was just a thought, just an idea. But he didn't. Because he meant it. He was leaving. And the worst part. I had pushed him to this. You didn't even talk to me about this, I said, my voice coming out smaller than I wanted. He sighed. Mom, I'm an adult. I don't have to ask for permission. I knew that, of course I did, but hearing him say it felt like a slap to the face. Is this because of me? I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Because of us? The showers? The way Mom, he interrupted, his voice sharp, too sharp. I stopped. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and what I saw in his expression made my stomach twist. Guilt. Sadness. And something else, relief. That was what hurt the most. It's not just that, he said finally. But, yeah. I think I need space. Space. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I don't understand, I whispered, but that was a lie. I did understand. I just didn't want to. That night, I showered alone for the first time in months. I stood under the hot water, letting it scald my skin, watching the steam curl around me. And for the first time, I felt the emptiness of the space. It wasn't just a bathroom, it was a symbol of everything I had refused to let go of. Maximus and I had turned it into a sanctuary, a place where the outside world didn't exist, where it was just the two of us, where I could pretend that nothing was changing. But it was changing, and I was the only one refusing to accept it. I ran my hands through my wet hair, pressing my forehead against the cool tile, my chest heaving. I had made so many mistakes. I had let my world shrink down to just one person, and now that person was leaving me. And I had no one else left. The next morning, I called Tiana Buchanan. I didn't even know what I was going to say, but the second I heard her voice, I broke. I think I messed up. There was a pause, then her voice, steady and calm, spoke. Talk to me, Bray. And so I did. I told her everything, the showers, the closeness, the way Maximus had become my only source of comfort, the only person I talked to, the only person I relied on. The way I had ignored every red flag, the way I felt like I was losing myself now that he was leaving. And for the first time, I said the words I had been too afraid to admit, I don't know who I am without him. Silence. Then a long sigh. Bray, this sounds like emotional enmeshment. What's that? It's when a parent becomes too emotionally dependent on their child, she explained. It's what happens when the boundaries blur, when a parent leans on their child for support instead of the other way around. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. That's not what this is. Isn't it? She asked gently. Think about it. When was the last time you spent time with someone besides Maximus? I opened my mouth, and nothing came out because I couldn't remember. I had stopped going out, stopped calling people, stopped being a person outside of being his mother. Tiana's voice softened. I love you, Bray. But you need to hear this. You can't make Maximus your whole world. That's not fair to him, or to you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut because she was right. And I had been so blind. The next day, I booked my first therapy session. It was terrifying, sitting in a small office across from a stranger, saying things out loud that I had spent years pretending weren't real. But once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I told her about my loneliness, about the way I had convinced myself that I didn't need anyone else, about how I had let my son fill the void left by all the relationships I never pursued. And my therapist said something that stuck with me, you're allowed to need people, Bray. But you can't make just one person your entire world. I had spent so long thinking that I was being strong, that choosing to be alone was the right thing to do. But in reality, I had just been afraid of rejection, afraid of failure, afraid of letting someone in and losing them all over again. So I had latched on to the one person who couldn't leave me. Until now. Maximus was moving on, and now I had to learn how to do the same. The day Maximus moved out, I sat in the apartment alone for hours. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I would collapse into myself, let the weight of it crush me, let the loneliness settle into my bones until I couldn't move. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the empty space where his things used to be, the closet door half open, the kitchen counter bare, the bathroom door slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone to step inside. The apartment felt too quiet. For the first time in years, I was truly alone. And I had no idea what to do with myself. The first few weeks after he left were by far the hardest. I had spent so much of my life weaving my world around Maximus, structuring everything I did and thought in relation to him, that without him by my side, I felt completely adrift, untethered. It was as though a vital part of me had been ripped away. Each morning, would wake up expecting to hear the sound of his footsteps on the floor, to see him rushing around, moving through our shared space with his familiar energy. And most of all, I would anticipate the comforting presence of another person, a silent companionship that had once been my constant. But every morning, it was just me. The house, which had once been filled with the rhythm of his existence, felt hollow and silent. And I could feel the weight of the emptiness pressing down on me. The loneliness crept slowly, insidiously. It wrapped itself around my heart in a suffocating embrace that I couldn't shake. There were moments when I'd catch myself reaching instinctively for my phone, my thumb hovering over his name, preparing to text him something mundane like, "What are you doing? Did you eat today?" But then, just before I sent the message, would stop myself. The truth was, he needed space to breathe and grow, just as I did. And I needed to learn how to exist outside of the world I had built around him. I needed to rediscover who I was when I wasn't constantly orbiting around someone else's life. So, for the first time in what felt like years, I turned my attention inward. I focused on myself, on what I needed, on what I had neglected in the whirlwind of caring for others. Tiana, ever the perceptive friend, was the first to break through the walls I had built around myself. She wasn't going to let me hide, and she certainly wasn't going to let me wallow in my isolation. One evening, she showed up at my door with that determined look in her eyes that brooked no argument. "We're going out," she said, as if she had anticipated all my excuses before I could even voice them. "No arguments. Get dressed." I wanted to say no. I wanted to retreat back into my loneliness and let it swallow me whole, to remain in the comfort of my solitude where I didn't have to face the world outside. But somewhere deep down, I knew if I didn't push myself, if I didn't step out of the confines I had built for myself, I would never change. I would stay stuck, caught in the past and unable to move forward. So I went. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. It wasn't the forced, hollow laughter I hadn't seen or spoken to in far too long. We met for coffee, shared long conversations, and I found myself enjoying the simple pleasure of human connection again. I went to restaurants alone, without that gnawing feeling that something was missing, without the constant worry of being watched or judged. I began to realize that I could be alone but not lonely, that my own company could be enough. And then, one day, I went on a date. It was nothing serious, just a casual coffee with a man Tiana had introduced me to, a quiet, unassuming evening that didn't promise anything except a pleasant conversation. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for enjoying someone else's company. I didn't feel like I was betraying Maximus, like I was somehow being disloyal. For the first time in years, I realized that I was allowed to have a life too, that I was entitled to my own experiences, to my own moments of happiness. It was a revelation, small but powerful, and it shifted something deep within me. Maximus and I still talked, though not as frequently as we once had. Our conversations were no longer daily, not like before, but they still existed, and that was enough. Some nights, he would call just to check in, to hear how I was doing. Other times, he would send a picture of something funny he had seen or a quick message that read, "Hope you're doing okay." It wasn't constant anymore, but it felt like just the right amount, comfortable, without the pressure of neediness or expectation. And that, I realized, was the difference. I wasn't clinging to every word, to every conversation, desperate to hold on to the fragments of what we had once been. I wasn't analyzing every text, reading between the lines, hoping for signs of something that wasn't there. I was letting him go, not in a way that meant losing him, but in a way that allowed him to be the person he was meant to become. I was giving him space to grow, to evolve, to live his life. And in doing that, I was growing too. I was learning that it was okay to be myself outside of the context of our relationship, and that growth could come from embracing the unknown and allowing myself to step into a new chapter, one where I wasn't defined by someone else's presence, but by my own strength.